Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to this episode of The Wisdom of, and I'm so excited about today's conversation with Dr. Katherine Hunt. She brings this idea of ethics to life in business, but not as red tape, instead as rocket fuel for growth. Is it possible to have a business that can be profitable, grow revenue, and be the kind of company that people respect and love to be around? She blends psychology, purpose, and integrity to help leaders make better decisions, build trust that lasts, and prove that doing the right thing drives extraordinary success. And what a refreshing message that is, Katherine. I can't wait to get into the conversation. I feel like it's a conversation that we should be having all the time, but maybe now more than ever.
Absolutely. Especially, I feel like there's a lot of growing companies that get a little bit of heat because they grow, because they're so profitable. And the reality is you can have your cake and eat it too in that space.
Great. Well, that's interesting. So a lot of growing companies, right? Imagine a relatively new company, relatively young leader, and it's growing, and they've heard about you from somewhere, and they invite you in. They don't really realize what they've just done. They've invited you in, and you want to flip their thinking on its head as fast as you can. What do you find yourself saying, or what examples do you find yourself giving to leaders to kind of quickly flip their paradigm so that then you can get into the real work?
Generally, it's around the client experience, the client journey, the customer journey. So we might start off with some general chatting about what kind of business they run, which will have sequences of onboarding, these types of things. A simple question like, and so just pause there. At this point of the client experience, what do you want the client to feel? Generally, that's the moment where everyone in the room says, yeah, we've never thought about that.
Yeah.
That's not how we think about it, how we can do things from our end rather than what the client's actually experiencing from their side.
Yeah.
So questions around that, very powerful.
It's what do you want the client to feel specifically? Yeah. Okay. So
Exactly.
Not what they're going to experience or anything, but what are they going to feel?
Yes, because that's the starting point, isn't it? And if we don't have the starting point, we can't go back and figure out what will they experience in order to feel that, and why are they feeling that in this moment? So what's happening before that? Because the client experience, it shouldn't necessarily just be peak, peak, peak. Everyone's feeling warm and fuzzy the whole time. We actually want to take clients and customers on some kind of little journey, a little bit of disruption, we want them to feel a little bit maybe self-reflective, a bit self-critical, a bit taking responsibility for themselves. And then we want to lead them through to this peak where they're feeling like actually they do have their life in their hands, or, whatever that journey looks like. It's all about emotions though.
In a heartbeat, I know that most organizations have not thought through that conversation you just outlined in a few minutes, right? It's deep thinking. And you have such a breadth of experience in terms of, having been a global leader in the financial services sector, specifically through the lens of ethics, have enormous experience in that sector. You're an academic, you're an author, you're a keynote speaker worldwide. You're working with companies in all sorts of industries. And, it's ethics is often compliance in a lot of people's minds. Like, let's tick the boxes, and I'm sure you've got a perspective.
That's absurd.
If I just led you into it, like, I could probably let you go now for the remainder of the podcast, but let's start there, where they often see it as compliance. I'm sure that's not what you're going to actually tell them it actually is.
Absolutely. The same, you're driving down a very quiet country road, maybe in your hometown or my hometown. I'm also from a small town. And there's a little old lady who's trying to cross the road. Okay. There's no crossing, and there's no rule that you need to stop, give her some space, maybe let her cross the road in front of your car. There's not cars behind you. It's pretty chill, but she's obviously struggling. There's no rule that says what you should do in that moment. No rule at all. But we know from ethics that, well, what you should do, regardless of anyone who's there to see you, is help this little old lady cross the road, whatever that looks like. And there's no rules around that. So if we start to think, oh, I'm an ethical business because I follow all the rules, that's like saying, well, I didn't swerve and kill the little old lady, so we're good, right? No, that's not ethics. I mean, that's a starting point. Compliance is not really, I shouldn't be just so disdainful of it, but it's a starting point. We definitely need to tick the boxes. But then as humans and as businesses, we need to elevate ourselves above that.
So I was a lecturer at university. When I went through my particularly undergraduate studies, you had to study actually, when I went through, you had to study philosophy, ethics, and in fact, theology. You had to study belief systems, right? And then that sort of dropped out of the business studies and then eventually medical studies and things like that. I think there's some return to it in some of the institutions, but have we paid a price for falling away from some of those deeper thinking that can be seen as a waste of time, direct courses of study and learning?
I think all of us have paid a price. And you know that. If we were just to think, say, if we were to just imagine 60 years ago, so we've all gone back in a time machine and we're in another small town and there's a lawyer, the town's lawyer. They've only got one. And we don't have any money, but we need the lawyer's help to help us with a little contract. But we don't have definitely any money. Do you think that lawyer of 60 years ago is going to help us anyway? I'd say yes. These days, now transformed to now, still a small town, there might only be one lawyer still or a couple. Would you be able to say with the same certainty that, yeah, they'll probably help you out? I don't think you could. And I think it's the same across almost most sectors where we've shifted a little bit towards the less honor, I suppose, and a little bit more commerciality. And the reality is that lawyer, to pick on lawyers because they're such an easy target, poor guys. I studied law in my PhD, so it's a bit of it's a bit reflective in a way. But I think that change is really interesting for all of us to consider.
Well, if I think about that small town experience, and for me, small towns that I grew up in was like 900 people and, little wheat belt towns, they wouldn't have even had a lawyer in that town, but the next biggest town would have had one lawyer, right?
Uh-huh.
And, if a couple are divorcing today, the person that pays is probably going to get the services of the lawyer, which means the other person has to go to the city or find somebody. I can remember, through friends of my father's and everything else, that sometimes they actually sat down with both people and said, let's actually sort this out and put the children in the middle and do this in a more productive way.
Yeah.
Because and it's not just the law examples, it's so many other things, in that small town experience. So you've said that ethics is purely social. And, what does that mean?
100%.
I mean, that's a bit of a reframe. I'm not even sure what the reframe is. I'd love to get the reframe.
Sure. Okay. So how about this? I found this really nice little stone on the beach this morning just before I was surfing, and I tucked it in my wetsuit so I could bring it home. I'm definitely an animal of this earth, I think. I love the little pieces of our earth. So if I brought that little stone home and then I smashed it with a hammer into 1,000 pieces, how would you feel about that?
Well, it's destructive.
Yeah, but do you care? That's no problem.
Well, I do.
You might be thinking like, okay, are you okay, Katherine? But other than that, you're not thinking like, well, that's the wrong thing to do. You shouldn't be smashing a stone into 1,000 pieces. But if I'd have said I brought home a little baby mouse that I found on the side of the road, and then I hit it with a hammer,
yeah, right,
you'd be like, whoa, yeah, righto. Yeah, okay.
True.
It's a bit full on.
It's
very full on. It's a very different reaction. And sure, a mouse is not exactly a part of our species or part of our social structure, but we could take it in any direction along that continuum. And you'd see, yes, if there's a human involved, it's really, really important. And also, if there's a human involved, then suddenly the rules kind of mean nothing. Because our care for our family, the way that you nurture your children and the people in your community, there's no rules about how you have to do that. Once they're 18, you've kept them alive, good job, tick, you never have to see them again, right? But you don't do that. Why not? Because you have an idea in your mind, and so do most of us, that part of our role as a species is to pass on some of those good ideas to the next generation. It's all social. Everything is social.
Yeah, yeah. No one has ever been told your job as a parent is to keep them alive until they're 18. It's like
Yeah,
who
yeah.
are they when you're, in your later stages, basically. And I mean, that's such an that's a really interesting analogy between break the rock into, thousands of little pieces as opposed to a living creature. Um, and yet so much of what we do, doesn't pass muster on what is right as opposed to, what is compliant. And so, you have this. I'm going to get to. I'll get it to it in a minute, and I'll see if we can build a model together, because you've helped companies double revenue and have great success with decision making frameworks that are based on ethics, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, because I'm sure people who are leading business will want to see some of that. And I want to make sure that people realize this is not about a compromise between you
Mm.
can be commercially successful or you can be ethically responsible. This is actually not a compromise. This is complementary. But so I want to dive into this. You spoke before about what would the customer feel, and there's this interplay you have about the ethics of client psychology. Let's dig a bit further into that. Then this whole idea of the client psychology. You have this unique blend of psychology and ethics and law and finance. It's an eclectic kind of blend of things. So let's dive into this ethics of client psychology a little bit and just let you loose on that topic for a few minutes.
Yeah, sure. So all of us in all of our businesses have clients or end users of our products. And every single person has three core basic needs, other than our primary and secondary instincts, of course. But we want to feel seen, we want to feel heard, and we want to feel like we belong.
Mm,
So if we're to set a framework of client communication, product development, client onboarding, or whatever it is that we're curious about in our business, whichever step of our sales funnel or anything,
yeah.
with those three key components of client psychology in mind, there's a very good chance we're going to end up with not just clients, but ambassadors for our
Mm,
business.
mm. And
And
so,
you know,
if they, how do we have some? What are some practical examples where you've worked with companies, and let's not talk about the obvious things, but where you've worked with companies and you've seen things that needed to be challenged that were so acclimatized now inside the company they weren't even noticing it. Where the clients weren't feeling seen and heard and like they belong. What are some of the things you challenged as you've done this work with companies around the world that, others might listen to this and go, actually, we could be doing that. We could have that. That could be a habit that we shouldn't be um, happy with as an organization. I'd love to get some examples of that.
mm, okay. So a really nice starting point is to consider in your client journey, a client somehow becomes a client of,
Yeah.
or a customer. What point are they dropping off? So we need data around this. So 100% of people start with whatever that looks like, and
Yeah.
then some proceed to there. And then at some point it drops down to like almost no one who's going to end up buying our service or our product. So what
Yeah.
is that point in the funnel where we have that big drop? Now, once we know what that point is, that's where we can drill down on it and figure out what's going on here. So one of the organizations that I was consulting with, they had that point was when the client needed to complete this online fact-finding questionnaire. Really long survey, but really important for this firm in order to do their job. Professional services firm, international, same processes pretty much.
So they needed that information from the client to actually deliver the service.
Yeah,
Okay, got
they
it.
couldn't
Right.
do it without it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a useless point of the client experience
Right.
necessarily, but that was also the point that the client dropped off. So once we found that was the point, great. So what is this experience like for a client? What is what do they feel? What do we want them to feel at this point? And can we talk to a few of those clients who've dropped off at this point, who didn't become clients? Why didn't they? What was the friction point? So, as you can probably anticipate what the issue was,
Yeah.
is is especially the demographic of the group. So this particular firm's, most of their clients were over 60, busy people, and just didn't prioritize, didn't see the value in them spending the time doing this. So we were able to change it so that it was incremental. So the right information was collected at the right time, so that a client, every time they gave a piece of information, they felt like this is a valuable thing that they will need in order to do the job they're going to do. But we didn't give it to them all at once, and we didn't give it to them all in the same medium. So as soon as a client didn't complete it within 2 days, we were able to shift the process so that they went into a different channel, which meant that they got a phone call in order to complete that, for example. So we went from almost all clients at that point dropping off. Still, they were still, a business that was running, and they were still doing great things. But we transformed that so that double the clients at that point kept going through the onboarding process.
I'm just having a very minor career crisis. So
you're thinking about the survey you're sending? Or?
No. I was a senior manager of a large business unit for one of Australia's larger companies, and we had factories, and I was responsible for them, and a lot of the employees of the factories did not have English as a first language, and people had to fill out a form for leave application. And, we had a lot of accrued leave amongst a whole bunch of people in the factories, and these were the people for whom English was not the first language, right? And so I'm saying to my factory managers, you need to get them to go on leave, right? We've got a problem. If a bunch of them want to go on leave at the same time, we've got a real problem. Turns out that form was almost impossible to fill in if you had a literacy problem, which they never tell you, and if English is your second language. The form is just overwhelming with the boxes and the little print and everything else. And we should have recognized that. That's the career crisis, right? But we're so attached to our own experience of it. And so when we said, if you want to book holidays, just go and see HR and they'll fill out the form for you. And all of a sudden, everyone's booking holidays. So it was just, sometimes it's little simple little tweaks, right? You talk a little bit about vulnerable clients and consent issues in ethics. I mean, it's a growing, identity theft, consent. There's a whole lot of fields in business we've got to be much more aware of. I'd like to lean in on that whole issue of vulnerable clients and consent and ethics around that, if you would.
Increasingly important. The number of big financial services organizations that are contacting me at the moment and asking for, how do we know if someone's vulnerable? What does that mean? And then what should we do about it? But we have to start with our ethical decision-making framework, because if we just jump in and say, oh, well, you're vulnerable if you don't have money, and if you're fleeing domestic violence, and if you're elderly and whatever, we can pick those for ourselves. But if we're not starting with our values as an organization, we're going to end up with a list of things that we're even interested in to begin with, that probably don't align to the actual community and the kind of people who we're trying to serve and protect. But it is a very challenging issue for so many organizations, because you can imagine, say, a client of a superannuation fund, they might be 85 years old, receiving a pension from that super fund, and something they might need to withdraw a lump sum, something super, super simple, but they might need to withdraw a lump sum because of something that's going on in their life. But they might actually have a dementia diagnosis.
Right.
They might have a low balance in their super fund. So we've got someone who's not only vulnerable because of the context, but also someone who's not able to give consent. So if we have vulnerable clients, then we can up the communication. We can help to give them many more paths to choose from and really empower them, as well as protect them in the way that we structure our businesses. But regardless of what we do, we need to make sure that our client is on board with that and says, yeah, that's the right thing for me, because that first and foremost ethical principle, individual autonomy, isn't it? Even though from the outside we know what's right for you. Actually, It's not complicated, but that individual autonomy is more trumps everything, weirdly, which means if they don't have the ability to give consent because they might have dementia, as we have increasingly in our society, then that becomes a massive issue. And if you think about, say, all of the superannuation funds in Australia, what percentage of their members would be not only vulnerable, but also unable to give consent? It's huge.
I wouldn't have thought that most people, confronted with a conversation about ethics in business, or maybe just ethics generally, would have gone to individual autonomy as a fundamental principle of ethics. Can you lean in on that a little further for me?
Absolutely. So when we're doing our ethical decision-making framework as a business, of course, we're working through our own virtues, our own values as an organization, our stakeholders, and all the rest of it. But ultimately, this is within an umbrella of individual autonomy. It is the primary principle, the only principle, really. If we had to say there's only one thing you need to do, it's let people make decisions about their lives, even if it's the wrong decision. The right to choose their path, whatever that looks like. So we can curate experiences so that we can curate the feeling where they feel like they need to take action. So they're not very comfortable in this moment. And then we can curate the feeling of, it's okay though, we do have a solution for you, so that they're likely to take action and actually help themselves out of whatever path they've walked down. But at the end of the day, it needs to be their choice. And that's such a big challenge, not only for organizations, but you've worked so much with governments, you know how that overlap comes into play, especially in a country like Australia, where there's a lot of government saying, look, we know what's right for you, kiddo.
Well, that idea of letting people make decisions about their own life, even if it's the wrong one, is actually compromised everywhere these days. Not just in what governments do, but in how businesses operate. I mean, if we make the shift to employees now, we've been talking about clients and customers, but we also have a major responsibility in business to your employees and your team. And then if a central tenet of ethics is autonomy, individual autonomy, but you want this person to perform for the company and be in the team and so on and so forth, there's a whole lot of stuff firing off in my brain at the moment. Let's talk about the employee side of this.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things here. The first is employees are still humans, which means they want to feel seen, they want to feel heard, and they want to feel like they belong. So that needs to guide how we structure all of our employee engagement programs. Yes. Those three principles. That's the first one. But the second one, the best organizations that I've worked with, they generally roll out something, it's usually called job crafting, which is where someone, obviously not the CEO in a big organization, but maybe a line manager, helps the individual to figure out, what is your purpose in life? Why are you here? What do you love? What are your causes you love? Is it the cats and dogs? Is it surfing? Is it travel? What is it? What is it that you really love? And then why are you at work? Why bother? Why not just, join the queue at Centrelink? It's a lovely queue. There's a reason. It's a reason. What's that reason? What's going on for you as a human? Okay, now this is the job we kind of need you to do here. We make widgets. So which part of this can we overlay on who you are, your values, what you're trying to aspire to achieve in your personal life, so that you're actually coming to work thinking, this day today is helping me to get to where I'm going in my life personally. It's helping me with the cats and dogs, or the surfing, or the travel, or the paying the bills, whatever that is. No, probably not paying the bills. That's a bit too rudimentary, but much more elevated than that.
There is an inconvenient truth in all of this. And it seems to be about a willingness to engage in really meaningful dialogue, which is, it's interesting. I was talking to a CEO actually just today, and I was helping him unpack his wisdom model. I have the ability to capture a person's wisdom in a single visual framework, and he was making. I said, "What is the single biggest realization you've had?" About what you've spent decades doing. And he said, "It's the single biggest realization I've had is that it doesn't happen by accident, and it's a direct and proportional function of the amount of thought and intention I put into it as the CEO," which is a very profound statement if you dig into that deeply.
Massive.
It's a direct proportional function of the amount of thought and intention I put into that. So none of this is by accident. So a highly ethical organization doesn't happen by accident. A highly engaged workforce does not happen by accident. A highly loyal kind of advocacy of clientele do not happen by accident. And, what is the thought and intentionality in this inconvenient truth of deep and meaningful dialogue, which we might be losing some skills for? Are you seeing any erosion on this because of the way the world is today?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, my definition for wisdom, I love that you've got that word that just pops up everywhere with the work that you do, because to me, wisdom is being able to see all 8 perspectives, shall we say, on an issue, and being able to stand back and entertain them all.
Yeah. I think Edward de Bono, I'm not sure if his first name was Edward. It'll come back to me. I shouldn't say that publicly, but the 6 thinking hats and the idea of parallel thinking and things like that. So dare we kind of lean a little bit into, because it's the topic of the day, AI and ethics and the ethical use of AI, because we've seen recent media stories about some large organizations getting rid of a lot of people, replacing them with AI, and then realizing that was a mistake, and almost having to say, well, would you come back? And not all of you, but some of you. And like, really? And then, people telling stories of being called by somebody, but it's not a human. It's an AI agent doing outbound, sales calls and things like that. Where does the conversation lead us in terms of AI and this need for, ethical behavior and practice in organizations? What's your thinking around the AI agenda?
It's so funny how it ends up being back at psychology. So AI is like a very highly competent, but a little bit weird intern. And just like a very highly competent, but a little bit weird intern, if you want to get the best out of them, you don't just say to them, hey, could you write me a sales script? Thanks. Get on it. Because they're going to give you rubbish.
Yes.
Or when they do give you rubbish, at least you say, okay, good start. Excellent. Now, how about for this one, you read some of the books of Alex Hormozy and then you write it. Give it a bit more structure. And then I like that. It's just that it's 15 pages long. And actually, I was looking for 1 paragraph. Could you try again? So, and that's what we need to do with an intern. And it's exactly the same what we need to do with AI. We need to treat it like it is this very competent, but very weird, very literal intern in many ways. And what that means is we can use AI in a way that makes us more human as leaders, or we can use it in a way that dehumanizes ourselves as well as dehumanizes this. Yeah. So we have this kind of semi-human experience. We can't 100% know that it's not a very highly competent intern on the back of that chat, right? We're told it isn't. Yeah. And I'm 99.999% sure it isn't. But if we start to engage with it in a way that's against our own values, in a way that's very, say, rude or very with poor leadership, the type of leadership that we would never exhibit with our actual team or with the community, then we're on a path that's not going to end well.
So a couple of interesting things that you kind of highlighted there. I mean, the thought crossed my mind while you were talking about that. Should we trust the ethical perspective of the large language models? And I suspect the answer to that is, well, who would know, right? Who would actually know?
Who would know and also know based on all the evidence Correct. We have.
And then you made a fascinating comment, if I can paraphrase it, that AI dehumanizes the voluntary user. Now, obviously, lots of people talk about the people who've been replaced involuntarily by AI and things like that. But I use AI a lot because it's a phenomenally productive medium to operate in. I treat it as a thinking partner rather than a tool. But I can see how pretty quickly, I've never thought about this until you just said it, but AI can dehumanize the voluntary user who thinks that they're in control. They're using it for their own purposes and everything else. But I could see how it could dehumanize you and dilute your unique qualities in so many ways. If you're not switched onto that, it's a super interesting perspective. Do you think we're future gazing a little bit, and you're in this world, we're having these conversations all the time? Do you think we're actually going to get to the point where we say, you know what, we need to really check in on the ethics behind all of these large language models? Or do you think the horse has already bolted and we're off?
Yeah, that's years ago. Literally, I was teaching this, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. Looking at the algorithms and the demographics of who was writing the algorithms. That was the concern back then. Who's writing the algorithms? It's all 20-year-old male virgins in Silicon Valley, pretty much.
Okay.
I don't know. I haven't actually met anyone who works in IT in Silicon Valley, but that's what we kind of imagine. And a lot of the data supports that. So when you're writing an algorithm and that's your worldview, of course you're going to make it end up being a little bit, and AI is trained based on algorithms to some extent until it's become what it is today. So of course it's going to end up a little bit biased towards the writers, shall we say. But that's so long ago that it's almost futile to even talk about it. It's like talking about, do you remember when we had square wheels? Yeah, that didn't work. And then we moved to round wheels. That was great. Like, you don't mention the square wheels because you've moved on. So yeah, the actual ethics behind the AI, in my opinion, is not really worthwhile talking about, other than like in comedy, when it really stuffs up, you're like, oh, that's hilarious. Like, now we'll talk about it just because it's funny, but I think everyone's aware, surely. If anyone ever said, oh, I had this ethical conundrum and I put it to AI and AI said, I'd be horrified.
So it's interesting. It leads us into this conversation, and I'll come back to Aspire in a minute. I want to talk about the decision-making framework, and your decision-making framework is Aspire. I want to unpack that, but what you've just shared is kind of interesting, because if we had this picture of AI in the middle, and it's a thing, it's an entity. I had another one of my podcast guests who is a genuine world expert in AI, said we should treat it as a new species on the planet, right? But if we if we don't know about the ethics of AI, what is fascinating about that is that it requires ethics on the input and ethics on the output. The ethics now need to be applied on the input and the output. What do we put into it, and how do we plan to use it, and what do we get out of it, and what do we and how do we judge that, right? And I think if the horse is bolted on the thing, on the entity, it's going to have to be human ethics on the input and human ethics on the output. The only way we can actually manage this from an ethical perspective is, well, what are we using it for, and what are we putting into it, and how are we engaging with it, and then what are we getting out of it, and does that make sense, and is it fair, is it the right thing, does it still leave people with their individual autonomy, et cetera, et cetera. So if we don't know what the ethics of the entity is, then the ethics have to apply to the input and output. Does that make some sense from a professional point of view, from your perspective?
It makes sense, and it's also the ideal situation in my mind also, because your and my ethics are different, because you grew up down south and I grew up on the beach. Not because of the geographic location, but we are different. We grew up in different families. And if we started to say, well, AI, we need to put in an ethical structure for it to make ethical decisions, whose structure is this? Is this the political party that's in power today structure, for example? Like, let's not go down that path. Let's instead have an idea that well, the AI has whatever ethics it has. It's just,
Yeah.
it does its own thing. It's just a great, fantastic new species with its own little ethics. Therefore, for me, what is my ethics that I'm bringing to this? And then now that it's given me this amazing output, which it does, it's so fantastic. Big fan. Now, how can I use my personal judgment and my professional judgment to assess this at this point?
Yeah. So
That's the ideal situation, I think.
So I guess we're bringing values on the front end, and we're bringing judgment on the back end. And judgment meaning, do we use it or not? Do we use the output or not? Let's take ourselves
And
back.
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
How do we interpret what it's given?
Yeah, but rather than just cut and paste or seamless agent action through a pathway. So let's go back to applying this whole idea to business. It's possible for companies to seriously increase revenue and profitability and market position and everything else through the lens of ethics. And I know that your framework is Aspire, and I'd love to turn this into a visual model for people. And but so let's Aspire stands for what? What is Aspire?
So the A stands for alignment with values and virtues.
Yep. Yes.
S is for stakeholders.
Yes.
P for protection.
What does that mean?
So that's the compliance, the tick box, the rules, the laws, the governing code of ethics, whatever that is, the formal stuff.
Yep.
I for integrity.
Yes.
R
Have you ever
for
found
review.
yourselves in conversations with people where they're saying, so what do you mean by integrity? Have you ever had that?
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. And as you know from your time in academia and in universities, I think it's almost half of our academic literature is concerned with words and their meanings, if you were to boil it down.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we all have, to some extent, a little bit of a different perspective of integrity. But, yeah, in terms of the framework, it of course means that we're aligning everything that we've gone through up until this point.
Yeah. Should have a meaning dialogue. R was what? Review, did you say?
Yeah. Review. 360-degree review, for example, at this point. Process reviews. So we haven't even made our decision, but is the process the right process that we've even followed? Could we rejig and start again before execution, which is the last step? So the final decision, the sign off, and actually rolling it out, which, as you've been in large organizations, as have I, and I'm sure you're aware that there's a lot of decisions that did get made and never got rolled out. So
yeah, I can see.
Very important.
So I can see something forming in my mind that says, if execution was in fact, a part of output, if you like, and let's say rolling it out,
which means especially communication is the key part for execution. How are we communicating this?
Yeah, great. And then prior to execution, there's this step of review. I'm guessing you mean of the decision that's being made, to make sure that pardon?
And of the process we've followed.
Okay. Great. Decision and process. So then we've got these four things in the front end that ultimately lead to a decision. So, there's a decision point. So we need to make the decision in here to have something to review and make sure that the process of that makes sense in order to have something to execute that we communicate well and roll out to get a result from. And so, there's obviously this conversation on the front about alignment, stakeholder protection, and integrity, right? Just because of gut instinct in terms of a model, right? I'll test it. Interestingly, when I'm building a model, I actually always start with the geometry, not the words.
Love that.
And the reason for that is the geometry gives you a sense of dimensionality and dynamics and things like that, right?
Interrelationship, absolutely.
So I'm guessing that the word aspire means alignment is where you start.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So
Alignment
if,
with values.
yep, so if we
Mm.
said alignment at the top, and we just went clockwise because people understand it, the second would be stakeholder,
Mm-hmm.
following your order.
Yes. Next would be protection.
Great.
And the
So,
next would be integrity.
great. And so you can see, geometry by itself is telling a story, right? This now challenges us because I've divided that circle into 4 quadrants with a couple of dimensions. Now I want to figure out what the dimensions are. So what is the intersection of alignment and stakeholders? What is that intersection if you had to try and summarize it in some way? And
So,
think about at the highest level of thinking around stakeholders and alignment. What is that highest level of
mm,
thinking for stakeholders and alignment?
the highest level would be achieving what we're here to do on
Okay,
Earth as individuals. So achieving our self-actualization, I imagine, because
let's
the values
yeah.
often
Well,
relate to those.
let's just use the word actualization, whether it's
Mm,
self or organizational or
mm,
humanity or like whatever the decision is that you're focusing on. You want to reach an actualization of the decision. Is that a fair statement?
yep. Yeah.
Okay.
I like it.
Let's go to the other end of that same continuum, right? So this is the interaction between integrity and protection. So integrity meaning the right things and congruence and everything else, but protection's about ticking the box. And so and it's also at the other end of actualization. What is this end about? And we'll see if the geometry holds up.
Does that mean that it is the opposite to
Doesn't
actualization
it
in terms
doesn't
of how this
well, it
the
doesn't
spectrum, or
it
not the exact
it,
opposite,
it
but
doesn't
the
have to be the exact opposite. It's sometimes the dimensions are it's a dimension of thinking rather than a continuum. And so, for example, if the top end was
mm,
actualization, the bottom end might actually be about risk. Now,
risk management, absolutely.
they
Yeah.
are they you can recognize them as 2 ends of a continuum or 2 ends of a dimension, but it's not a pure continuum, right? So, how do we kind of really
If it was
actualize the
risk,
outcome?
if it was risk management, I think it would be a perfect continuum
Okay, so risk management.
because one is how do I make sure I don't lose what I've got,
Yes.
and one is forget that, let's go for the moon.
Yeah. So you have at the low end risk management, at the high end actualization, right? Um, so let's go to the high end of alignment and integrity. What is that? And you talked about values and virtues and things
Mm,
like that. Is that what you would put at that top end, values and virtues?
absolutely. So similar to actualization, though, in
So
that
would you
it's,
change it in
yeah,
some
really.
way?
The, so we want an overlap between alignment and integrity.
Yeah, or it's either
And
an overlap or it's what is produced by alignment and integrity. It could be either or.
aha, okay, okay. So I think values and virtues is good.
Okay. And if actualization is actually about um, for footnote, almost the actualization of the goal or the intention, if you like, might give some
Hmm.
distinction between the two. What is at the low end of this where protection and stakeholders are coming together? So we're ticking the boxes on the protection piece, and it's
Mm.
it's of
That's
stakeholder interest.
so I would say that would be reputation management or reputation protection.
Well, in the interests of staying consistent with risk management, I'll put reputation
Reputation
management there because I
management.
like I
Mm.
like models that have symmetry.
Yes. So
um,
appealing.
and so if I was, and so the second, the key component of it, you codify thinking into a model, but then you have to choreograph the message, right? I've
Mm.
also just realised that communications is hiding behind my face, so I'll fix that up. Um, so if I was actually presenting this model, if I said, I did this interview with Dr. Katherine Hunt, it was fascinating. She talked me through this Aspire framework for ethics in organizations, that if you were to apply it to critical decision making, in fact, all decision making, you could potentially double revenue, drive higher profits, high levels of important marketplace positioning, employee attractiveness, et cetera, et cetera. And it really is all about the execution of decisions that matter. And so what a lot of people do is they start at the decision and they
That's a nice line.
they just try and wrestle their way through the decision. And there's nothing in front of it. And so having made a decision, oftentimes they jump straight from decision to execution. From an ethics point of view, there should always be a point of review where you review the decision and the process to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of makes sense, but it offers a natural question, which is, well, what do you mean process, Katherine? And if I was Katherine in front of you, I think Katherine would probably say to you, there are two dimensions here. There's this dimension about what you're doing, and then there's this dimension about who you are. And, at the top of that, those two dimensions create this quadrant we call alignment. It's the starting point. Alignment is the first step in the process. Are we aligned and crystal clear about the goal that we're trying to actualize here with this decision and the values and virtues that we're going to bring to the table while we're doing that, and that we are absolutely going to stay true to? That we will, act on with integrity to the left of it and in the interest of the stakeholders to the right of it. The second step, of course, is the stakeholders themselves. Who is it that we're acting on behalf of, and who is it that should be involved? And are we all, aligned around the goal that we're trying to actualize? And, are we interested in the reputation that comes out of this? So when this is done and dusted, do we care about how we're seen as a result? And then the third side of this is protection. This really is taking care of the things that we've got a responsibility to take direct care for. Some of it is compliance and ticking the box, but other sides of protection are the things that maybe catch you off guard. And it's sitting right alongside integrity, which brings this, is driven by this desire for risk management. So, protection is about risk management and reputation management. And then that leaves us with this third side to the triangle, the fourth side to the little model, which is integrity. And it's interesting. Sometimes people will say, well, what do you mean by integrity? But, we probably shouldn't have that conversation, because what we mean by integrity is, are you showing up in alignment with the values and virtues that define you as an organization and that society would applaud you for? And are you managing the risks in front of you that you should be responsible for managing, that you had some reasonable ability to have foresight on and met the responsibility of that foresight? And so through alignment, stakeholder protection, and integrity, you can walk through almost any decision at a much, much deeper level than most. And, what will pop out of that decision when you make it is a commercially smart, and because ethics is always social, commercially smart and socially acceptable,
or more, so that society will applaud you for.
Okay, socially not acceptable, socially applauded decision. And if you review it, you'll find the process gave you that answer. Now go and execute it. By the way, the likelihood of success on execution as a percentage will be much higher if you do this than it would be if you don't. As you hear that back, Katherine, we've built a little model that people could take away and use. As you hear that back, does that fit with Aspire and what you're talking to people about?
I think it's a fantastic representation. Well done. Very impressive to see you in action.
It's circles, squares, triangles, and lines, but they tell a story. So I mean, it's useful for people to be able to capture that, like, take it away, folks, and apply the thinking of ethics to your business, because it can drive revenue and results that you're trying to drive in so many other ways. So if we think about, I'm pretty conscious of the time. I'm loving the conversation. I think it's a conversation we should be having every opportunity we get to have it, basically. Can we think about scaling. Scaling is the buzzword of the day. And I wonder sometimes if, in the interests of scaling, we throw some of the ethical considerations away a little bit because we just, or even if it's not scaling, sometimes it's survival. For years, the first step from a survival point of view often was mass layoffs and redundancies. Of course, the question is, what's the ethic of that? And then scale, in today's world, the first response might be mass automation and AI. And so what are the ethics? Do you have any kind of thoughts?
So linked to layoffs.
Yeah, correct. So do you have any kind of observations around the whole scale and survival continuum and how ethics applies to that? So when people are under pressure, because ethics shouldn't just, valuable things are always tested under duress. And so ethics should hold up under duress. So, I'd love you to share any thoughts you have about that. And then we'll get into some quick questions so people can know a bit more about you.
Yeah, great. So when it comes to scale in particular, what we really want to look at is overlaying and realizing that there's short term and then there's long term. So if we want a short term goal, we just need to focus on the communication of whatever is happening right now. In the case of, say, layoffs, for example, we can pretty clearly say that, yes, there's AI layoffs, and 3 years ago there were automation layoffs, and 3 years before that there was algorithmic layoffs, and 3 years before that. So tech companies are going to lay off every 3 years. That's what they do. That's part of their process. But the communication around that is really, really key, and that's what they're often failing at with a group Zoom call and that kind of thing. But if we're to just look at scale long term, or even just medium term, so looking at the impacts in, say, 12 months to 3 years rather than just the immediate fight or flight, then we know that we can embed our actual structures for scale within the ethical framework without actually compromising anything at all. Because what will come down to, every single thing that we do will come back to, what are we here for? We're here for people. People what? People growth physically, people's growth mentally, people's safety, security, people being happier. Okay, awesome. So how can our business actually do that? Well, there's a lot of easy ways, right? Like if we are investing in our digital brand through education, just educating people, giving away a lot of our knowledge, not holding it behind gates. What we're doing then is we're acting ethically and we're setting the foundation up for massive growth in the future. Or building our referral network. Again, how can we add value to the people who are going to see value of us for their clients? So how can we build that really intentionally and in a way that's sustainable? It's not just, hey, can we have a referral agreement? Like, can you send me and I send you? And not like that, but like genuinely, how can we add value to these different groups? And another foundation of growth and scale, which is the one-to-many. So that might be media, but it's probably more likely for most businesses on the smaller side anyway. Workshops, keynote speaking. You and I love being in front of a stage, and the power that can generate. So if we can go into each of these three scale activities with the intention of, you know what I'm here for? I'm here to give value to this community of people in front of me, to this group of people. How can I educate them or give them one thing they can take away and transform their lives? So the ethics and growth can be 100% aligned, so long as, just reminds me of that quote you said, so long as it's done with full intentionality. With that CEO you were talking to today who said about just being very intentional about what it is that I'm doing. And why?
Yeah, it's interesting. It almost makes me feel like, in a traditional industrial age view of organizational design and thinking, this ethical pathway to profit and growth, it feels counterintuitive to the industrial age kind of business model, if you like. But I also feel like around the world, people really want this. People want to be able to believe that others are acting, in their better interests, if you like. And then I guess we come back to personal autonomy, don't we? And
always
as a foundation point. I could chat with you all day about this, but that would make for a very long podcast and so episode. So I'd love to wrap up with kind of two or three, questions, your fastest response to them, and maybe through the lens of, your life's work, if you like. And so when I say, where would you like to have, and why, it's obviously through the lens of your life's work. So, if you're happy to play this little closing game with me.
Let's go for it.
If you could spend the day in the mind of any historical figure, who would you love to have spent the day in the mind of, and why from that ethics lens?
Ooh, I think I'm going to pick Churchill because he had crazy stuff happening. He didn't have a right path forward at all. He had kind of lose-lose choices, really significant lose-lose choices. And that fascinates me, that he seems in hindsight to have made some really great choices and yet didn't win his re-election during the war, what? Something's going on in that time period that I'm missing. And so that would be fascinating to be able to see and pull apart in hindsight.
But people knew what he stood for.
And they still didn't elect him.
No.
How bizarre. Re-elect him.
No, that's true. Would they have won the war without him? I guess is the other question.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's such a hero.
Maybe.
I don't think anyone else could have
and
done
so
what
maybe
he did. Although,
maybe everything has its time. In the same way, if you could have been in the room of any important negotiation, and you're sitting there just a fly on the wall watching it, but you're watching it through your lens, what negotiation would you love to have been able to witness firsthand?
Ooh, when Rio Tinto exploded those 45,000-year-old caves.
Wow.
That decision is so fascinating to me because I've actually assessed it using my ethical decision-making framework. They engaged stakeholders. They had the community involved. They checked the laws. They took their time. Everything was good until integrity. And for
people that are not aware of that story, right? These caves had cave art in them, and
45,000-year-old cave art, some of the oldest in the world.
Yes. Could you imagine saying, we're going to go and blow up a pyramid? And lose everything in it. That is fascinating.
And with the wisdom of hindsight, easy for you and I to say with the wisdom of hindsight, right? So I would have loved to have been in that room, I think, as they made that decision.
From a review perspective, to try and see how they arrived at that and understand it. Got it.
Yeah, and alignment with integrity as well.
Yeah, because they
did tick all the boxes.
Yeah, they're not alone on that, by the way. It's not, you've used that as an example, but they're not alone on that. This is happening all the time, and we all do it. We all do it. If you could time travel to any period in history, let's say any period where you get to study the ethics of the time, what would fascinate you?
Oh, AD 30 for sure. Absolutely. Just when Jesus arrives, starts to roam around, have a chat with people, that'd be so fascinating. I love ancient history and the structure of that time. I'm not personally a Christian, although I was raised, of course, like many, in the Protestant church. But the story, the values, the friction with the reality of the time as well. And I've spent some time over in Israel and starting to get a feel for okay, so imagine what it would have been like out here in the desert back then. Woo! Yeah.
Well,
that would be cool.
I guess to see it firsthand as opposed to, writings, because the conversation has been fascinating.
Yeah, and there's no point looking at writings in many ways because writings were written by the literate and the wealthy and just by good luck have in some way survived through various mistranslations, etc.
Say that again. Writings were written by the literate and the wealthy.
Yes.
And the implication of that then is
that it's not complete at all. It's not an actual reflection of the humans of the time. It's a reflection of who wrote it at the time in many ways. but the humans of the time must have been, you can see glimpses of the kind of struggles and the journey and that they were pulling together different values systems to try and figure out who are we in this area of the world. Yeah, it'd be fascinating.
I can't think of a better piece of wisdom to end on than that. Katherine, thank you so much for the time that and the generosity of thinking, and for coalescing decades of work into a conversation that I know people watching the episode will get a lot of benefit of. So thank you so much for giving us your time and wisdom today.
Thank you for having me.